welcome everyone in the room and also online. I'm glad to see quite a lot of people today. And thank you for joining today's seminar. So for those who don't know me, my name is Rob Raven. I'm a professor of sustainability transitions at MSDI, here at MSDI. And I will host the seminar today. And before we start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where we're currently based and pay my respect to the elders past and present. So I'm very pleased that, that we've got Professor Evelyne de Leeuw, another Dutchie, in the room today as a speaker in this seminar. All good things come from Holland. And Evelyne is a professor of urban health and policy at the University of New South Wales for at least another month. She just told me she's moving to Canada for a very prominent position in Montreal, it was. So. And the talk that she will be giving today will be all about the work that she will be doing in Montreal. So really keen to learn more about that, Evelyne. So Evelyne holds a Master of Health Policy and Administration, as well as a PhD in Health Political Science at the University of Maastricht in the Netherlands. So a really interesting combination of things, being a health practitioner or health professional, an academic, as well as a political scientist. And you also have a very long history of working at this intersection, including in the World Health Organization, where you've been involved from the mid-1980s in a network called the Healthy Cities Network. You're also the director of the World WHO Center for Healthy Cities. And along the way, Evelyne has been an active promoter of healthy cities as well through a series of conferences also organized by the World Health Organization. Now, besides all that important work, you've also been doing and been very active as an academic. So you hold various editor-in-chief positions, particularly in 2 journals, and also the editor of a Palgrave series on health political science, a book series. And you published more than 300 articles, which is a lot, plus 8 books. And on top of that, she's written 3 novels. So you could say Evelyne is a very productive scholar who is, still not ready for retirement, but just take another job in Montreal. So very pleased to have here Evelyne. Evelyne will talk for about around 40 minutes, and there's room for Q&A afterwards. So please think of questions that you want to ask at the end, and I will moderate that with help from Stefan, some help from Stefan, who will take a look on the online questions that might come through. Evelyne, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. It's great to be here. I'm always hesitant with amplification because I'm in a cave now. So yes, Rob is right. I'm doing a lot of things, and I'm not really a specialist in any of these, politics or cities or pandemics or One Health, but I'm an expert in where it intersects. And that is a challenge because all of those disciplines separately think that I'm a little bit suspect. And recently, I put it in microscopic letters at the top here. I was bored with my life doing healthy cities and public health, and I thought I need to pitch a new idea to Oxford University Press for a new journal. What is this century all about? Now, you guys here will think it's all about sustainability and carbon neutrality and all that, which is true. But I realized, reflecting on healthy cities and what's happening in the world, that infrastructure is the thing. This is the century of infrastructure. So I pitched the idea to Oxford University Press to launch a new journal called Infrastructure in Health, OOIH. That's the little thing there. And we think, even though we are a bit of a slow starter, because we don't have thousands of articles yet. Well, we just started. If you look at the Belt and Road Initiative, if you look at the $1 trillion investment in infrastructure in the United States, if you look at the EU's green plans, it's all about infrastructure. And infrastructure for us is not just hardware, building road, rail, air. Although I'm doing an interesting project in healthy airports, which I will not talk about. But infrastructure is also green and blue, and knowledge systems and indigenous perspectives, indigenous knowledge systems. And I will only briefly touch on all of that in my presentation. Rob was right. In about a month, I will move to Montreal, where amazingly, I'm even stunned myself still. I have an opportunity to set up a new idea about one urban health, one health in cities. And that's what I'm going to talk about. And the essential thing about one health in cities is not one health or cities. The essential thing is politics. Because to make this happen, we need to get the politics right. And it all starts almost as a joke. Walks a man into the Wuhan wet market and orders a fried pangolin with a side of braised bat. And that's how the pandemic started. In the past, we thought that one health, intermingling species, pathogens jumping between species, that was a thing that happened in scary jungles in Africa, Ebola, Zika, chikungunya, or it happened in the intensive bioindustry, pigs getting diseases, chickens getting ill, and then jumping into terrible new flu forms. What the pandemic showed us that's not where terrible disease happens, and that's not where humanity is threatened. This happens in cities. And so bats and pangolins make their way into cities because cities, we've become an urban planet. Few years ago, 15 years ago, we passed a milestone that more than half of humanity lives in cities, no matter how you define cities. And these days, we are steeply increasing that. And that means that nature encroaches on us and we encroach on nature. And this whole One Health idea that we are being challenged by getting into the space of other species is something that we need to really address. And it's not just One Health in cities that we need to consider, it is cities that are One Health. So questions that people have been asking in the more than human connections, and really we are anthropocentric. We look at these things from the perspective of humans. And one of the things that I will touch on later is that we need to move away from that anthropocentrism. We need to actually look more holistically to what happens on the planet. But questions that have been asked are, who ate the pangolin? And how did the pangolin even get into the city, if that was where it all started? Some people will say, no, it was a gain of function experiment gone wrong in a lab in Wuhan. Well, no matter what, it escaped and people got ill. So why don't we control pangolins? Why don't we make sure that they don't bring the evolution of scary viruses? And if you start thinking about that, you have to think about all these other species that may be involved: primates, poultry, fish, all that sort of stuff. And all of that, of course, is exacerbated by things like climate change. Our nature, our world is changing, and we interact with nature, with the hardware of nature, mountains, waters, green, and all the other living species in radically different ways now than we did only a few years ago. And some of that is even further exacerbated by human conflict, war. All of that is an issue. I'm in a university, and I assume I'm talking in the cyberspace to other people who think a lot in universities. So what research could you do when it comes to this challenge of looking at One Health, all of those species in cities? Well, there's the clinical and epidemiological view. There's evidence. What is evidence on this importantly critical interaction between environments, humans and other species? And how do you communicate that evidence? And there's information on systems development, systems maintenance. And there's a lot of, I think, very valuable and important research on the settings in which this happens. And that has to do with social science and with how people deal with these things. One of the things once I started thinking about this, I got an appointment on a technical advisory group of the World Health Organization in One Health. And of course, there's veterinarians and epidemiologists and very clever quantifiers of the human world, and they want to know, how do we control this One Health challenge where we all intermingle, and what is the perspective? And veterinarians have a very different perspective from the epidemiologists and all those others here. And ultimately, when we commissioned the Italian Institute of Public Health to compile case studies, in discussing this with them, we said it always happens in a place. So a place where this happens possibly is where you want to focus in your case studies. It happens in a laboratory. It happens in a chicken pen. It happens in the street, in a market. It happens in a city. It happens in communities that are places. So place-based perspectives on this One Health thing are important. And interestingly, this is a review of the core competencies of the international health regulations. So when the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a pandemic, now there's a name for it in the health regulations of international concern. Yes. One of the things that they did by declaring it, and this is law, so it's not just the science of law, legislation. What it meant was that they could unleash a lot of regulations, and that meant that countries had to put in action things that they have been complying with, supposedly, because they signed up to the international health regulations. And these are the things that countries are supposed to do. They need to have a surveillance mechanism. They need to have laboratories to measure all of this stuff. And then it goes down. I'm not speaking to all of this. But WHO measured how countries are complying with those rules. And they're not. Even Australia, and we think that we are really doing very well, but even Australia is not complying with this. No country is fully complying with this. And even if we were, we don't have a clue. Interestingly, I just onboarded a PhD student because he was desperate to join me in this thinking. And he is looking at the Australian Pandemic Preparedness Plan, which was published weeks before the pandemic hit. It was adopted by government in October 2019. About the moment that virus came out of the wet market or the lab in Wuhan. And if you read that document, it's naive, it's stupid, it is completely disconnected from reality. All the options that they list that you can invoke and implement in order to control a pandemic are voted away. No, masking, let's not do masking. Quarantine, no, let's not do quarantine. An amazing document in history and so Glenn is going to look at why does this happen. What happens is politics, and we will eventually get there. So I only have little time here. So if you talk about that complexity and the interaction of all that complexity, there's a number of issues. And Tony is here, our planetary health champion, first professor in the world in planetary health. Planetary health would be one of those perspectives that actually would reflect on this and would give a framework to think about the things that I just advocated. But he's not alone, and he knows that because, there's also things like eco-health. And the eco-health people will say, no, planetary health is us. And planetary health people will say, no, eco-health is us. And then there's urban ecology. The urban ecologists, they may not be concerned with human health that much, but they're very much concerned with a multitude of species health and well-being. And then there is this One Health thing. And One Health really has achieved a degree of political prominence that planetary health may not have achieved. And some people have accused me of jumping on the bandwagon doing One Urban Health rather than urban planetary health or whatever you might want to call it. And I don't care. I like all of these things, and I see how it's different and how we can all collaborate. I have a PhD student who is finishing right now as we speak, and she looked at different conceptualizations of urban health. Because if you're in urban health, you may think it's very clear what I do, health in cities. Well, that's not what epidemiologists say. That's not what health services researchers say. They say urban health is about building healthcare precincts. That's urban health. And it's not what WHO Healthy Cities version 1 would say. They would say that urban health is about social movements and about mobilizing communities to put health high on social and political agendas. And it's not what Americans would say. Michael Bloomberg doesn't see urban health that way. He sees healthy cities as, and the rhetoric is unfortunate occasionally, best buys for investing in health in cities. Best, as if we always have to spend money on buying the best thing that's around. Anyway, different perspectives. I don't care. I've chosen One Health. Mostly because 4 organizations have signed up to a very powerful and empowering view of One Health. The Quadripartite published a plan of action last year, working together for the health of humans, animals, plants, and the environment. And the Quadripartite, the 4 parties, is UNEP, the United Nations Environment Programme, the Food and Agriculture Organization, the World Animal Health Organization. I did not know until 4 years ago that existed, but my dog has signed up for that, and the World Health Organization. And this is a plan of action how to do things better. But even they suffer from silos and not recognizing each other's strengths. So even though it's a plan of action, things are missing from this discourse. And I'm very happy to have received funding from the Canadian government to actually look at how complex this all is. This quadripartite program of action connects with very profoundly, I think, with an important report that a lot of people have missed during the pandemic, the Monti Commission report in Europe, which has a fantastic title, Drawing Light from the Pandemic. It has a key report that says this is what has happened. This is what the politics should be to get out of it. And Martin McKee led, I hope you know who Martin McKee is, a very prolific critical thinker about public health around the world. He provides a body of evidence that supports all of that. And the body of evidence, the second report actually, is much more interesting than the recommendations of the Monti Commission. And I created a little short bit.ly there to make it easy to access these things. So if you want to know this, look it up. One of the things, the bottom lines of these 2 reports is that the pandemic has shown that we have a social responsibility. This isn't just about the politics of containing pandemics. People have a social responsibility to come together and deal with that and not put ourselves at the center. There's much more in the world that needs to be taken into consideration. An implementation vehicle for this, I think, is cities, local governments. As I said, One Health happens in places. And cities, local governments, community organizations are the entities where you can actually make an impact on change at the local level. So Habitat, I think, would have to be part of the quadripartite, it then becoming a pentapartite. which is an interesting thing, and the United Cities and Local Governments Organization, which is the global umbrella organization of local governments, really would have to be thinking about what they need to do for One Health and for planetary health as well. So when we talk about this very small interface between all of those things, there are some challenges that need to be addressed, and I hope in the next 8 years in Montreal I will be able to address some of these things. First, the need for transdisciplinarity. We won't survive this if we stay in our silos, if we stay within our disciplines. And when I talked about infrastructure earlier, this is such a good example where all sorts of disciplines have to come together in order to make infrastructure work. Engineering has to work with social science. In some countries, there are organizations that challenge this and organize transdisciplinarity. In Germany, for instance, there's the TD Academy, the Transdisciplinary Academy. And I don't know why, but I've become a fellow of the Transdisciplinary Academy, and we have a fellow group. One of the great things about this academy compared to other traditional academies is that if you are appointed to the Academy of Social Science or the Academy of Science, it's you, the individual, that's important, and you go on the news and you are the talking head, and it's your fame and beauty that counts. The Transdisciplinary Academy actually says, no, that's not how it works. Transdisciplinarity is a matter of teams. So they only appoint fellow groups. And so I'm part of a small fellow group with some really, really interesting people who do transdisciplinarity and who do things like living labs, where they actually exercise and scope transdisciplinarity at the coalface. So that is really interesting to be working with other people. And I realize that that there are people who find it troublesome to work with others. They want to be in their own silo and do their own thing. That's good. Eventually they will die, and we will. I also think to do this well, there's the great opportunity of citizen science. This, if that social responsibility that the Monti report showed us, if we really want to take that challenge up, we have to frame citizen science and engage communities better in making our world, understanding our world, and making our world tick for the better of all of us, including all those other species and the water and the blue and the green and all that. I mentioned living labs, so there are labs beyond the lab. So we're in a university, and universities are very good to put labs inside walls. We can move those labs outside the walls of the ancient institutions, which is the thing. And I said this, humans are not the center. We believe we are, and there's good reasons, but we need to acknowledge that we're not. We need to move beyond this. And that is, in adopting more than human views, there are other ways of framing this reality. For instance, thinking about virtual worlds. My colleague Deborah Lupton, who is a sociologist, has written beautifully about how the virtual is part of the real, and how the virtual actually creates opportunities that we haven't acknowledged before. Melanie Rock, one of my Canadian colleagues, has looked at multi-species urban governance. So can you give other species in the urban environment a voice? And some lawyers, some legal specialists have actually taken this on and moved a step further to this. Can a river or a mountain have a legal persona? And New Zealand, once again, you're at the forefront, Tony. New Zealand was the first country in the world where a river actually could take the country to court for very good reasons. Now, wouldn't it make a vast difference if non-human entities would have the ability to challenge us for what we do? And I think that is really, really cool. Design and artistry is a way of looking at this, other images of the world. And we need to do that through indigenous voices. One of the things in communicating with the Canadians is, and I had acknowledged that in my work here in Australia, is that indigenous cosmologies, understandings of the world, are so much more deeper and much more attuned to this One Health perspective than Western Cartesian siloed views. And we need to actually forefront that much more in our knowledge systems. And it happens everywhere. So this looks like a tree, but this is an artistic representation of the Anthropocene, of how we have created a planet where only the outer crust all of a sudden radically has been changed by humans, which is a much more evocative image than all the stories that you can read in the Lancet and all those places. So the challenge for me when I started thinking about this is to integrate and synergize the One Health idea with my view of healthy cities. My view of healthy cities is that healthy cities are a social movement. They're not, you need epidemiology to understand what's going on. You need maybe health services to make people healthy. But people make cities tick. And therefore, that is the core of what's going on. One Health, the picture that I showed before had three interacting areas, animal health, natural health, and human health. And I mentioned cosmology as an important dimension. And I truly believe that spirituality, thinking about the world and the meaning of the world and representations of the meaning of the world, is a very important fourth part of the One Health perspective. And thinking about connection to country, and Rob welcomed us to this country this morning. What I've come to realize, I live in Australia 18 years now, and one of the things that I have come to realize is that a welcome to country isn't a welcome to this country. We open the door, come in, make yourself feel at home. A welcome to country is a welcome to me, to the community, to my world. And that encompasses much more than just the physicality of that world. And that means that One Health can be inspired by these cosmologies and spirituality. And it's a thing that the Canadians enthusiastically embraced. So that is going to happen. I think there is a great opportunity. One of the things that the money that I will be given by the Canadians will do is to strike up partnerships. And there are very important partnerships that are already going. And so I don't want new partnerships. I want to invigorate and strengthen existing partnerships. And again, Tony comes in here. IUHPE, the International Union for Health Promotion and Education, has an Indigenous working group. And they have a number of statements that actually say this. So, that's where we connect Indigenous voices and perspectives and do something much more important. On the right here are the 11 qualities of healthy cities in my world. So this is not Mike Bloomberg, or this is not the medical industrial complex building precincts. This is my 11 qualities. Well, not mine. They are Len Dulles and Trevor Hancock's. And one of the great things about being in Canada is that I will be closer to Trevor, who is one of the fathers of all of this thinking in a way. And healthy cities are not about urban planning, and they're not about roads, rail, and that sort of stuff. They are about social infrastructures, about connecting to heritage and history, being creative, and all of those things. So how would we do that? How would we synergize this? That is the challenge. Well, it's not for nothing that the funding is for 8 years, and that the plan can be ambitious. Well, the challenge is, this is going to be a fight. We're going to struggle. People will say, this is a fantasy, go away. What we need is more lab research. So it's about politics. And that's where my unique capacity thinking about politics, political science applied to health in cities comes out. Adrian Lefwich really framed it well. He said politics is about conflict and managing conflict. I'm not going to read out the whole definition here, but it's a process of conflict, cooperation, negotiation, and how you resolve them. And the father of political science, Harold Laswell, really said it much more concisely. Politics and policy making is who gets what, why, when, and how. That's what we try to influence. And that is driven by how we see our world. And this, how we see our world is, belief systems, ideology. In political science, we talk about policy ontologies, coherent systems of how you look at the world. A lot of people would say, Australia, we never can get this done because we're too neoliberal. Even Labour, when they're in power, they're neoliberal light. We never can move beyond this. We need to have a Nordic welfare state in order to fix this. That is such a naive, limited view of how you have to think about the world. Policy ontologies are coherent, internally coherent views on how the world ticks. Liberals have a different view of how that works from socialists or social democrats. So to map these ontologies would be a very important first step to understand how things like neoliberalism, how things like a particular form of welfare state shapes the opportunities to do things. And it would avoid a lot of unnecessary action, frustrating unnecessary action on our part, because we've been fighting things for many years without gaining any success. Well, by understanding the ontology that drives particular preferences, you would know where you can, in what basket you have to put your eggs. So that's what I think is important. Another perspective that combines, in order to make sense of this, the Dutch expression is, how do you make chocolate of this? Well, this is how we make chocolate of this. I'm a great fan of the work of a man called Constantino Doxiadis. And Doxiadis, in the 1970s, when everything was different, he said, I know the science of human settlement, and it's very easy. Everything consists of fives. And he had this whole thing about networks, nature, anthropos, society, and shells. And all of these things connect with each other, and they give the different permutations of human settlements. And well, even now you can see how networks are relevant and important, how we connect, how AI drives our current thinking, how knowledge is or is not relevant, how nature drives our opportunities and it challenges us. Man, not a man, is an important part of that, as is society. And shells, if you read it superficially, this is not about Botticelli and Venus and the shell. Shells are the structures that we create to make our lives more easy. Homes, buildings, skyscrapers, but also institutions with the hardware that come with them, hospitals, universities. And the interconnection between these things drives what makes cities, what makes human settlements tick. The balance between these is what is important. Now, acknowledging this, there's another thing that makes it tick when we want to look at politics, and that is governance. Again, there's a little bit of Dutch touch here. Peter Hupe is a professor of political science. He was in Leiden. He's moved to Belgium, Leuven, and they say if you want to do policy and politics, you need to understand governance. And governance, really, the short definition of governance is this is how we do stuff around here, and that means it ranges between laws, institutional arrangements that are fixed in Parliament, but also how how we have rules, how we communicate with each other. You know, there's certain things that you don't do in human interaction, and that's also part of governance. And Hill and Hooper actually made this nice little grid where they have different forms of governance and different levels of how to think about that governance. And you have 9 fields where you can think through how this is how we do things around here applies to different dimensions of our endeavor to understand our world and to shape our world. And that's very simply for managing contacts, you know, how we actually talk to each other, how we send emails, and how we expect a reply or not, down there, to institutional design. This is how we hope that our world works best in our context. And my idea for the One Urban Health perspective that I'm going to build up in Montreal, Une seule santé urbaine, because I have to speak French there. They give me 1 year to become totally fluent, is to combine Doxiadis and the idea of governance within a political framework that looks at One Health in cities. So practically, what does that mean? And I thought I should stop here and take questions or suggestions. What I have fantasized a little bit, and this may have been a bit esoteric or conceptual. How does this work? How are we going to make this stick in 8 years when I walk away from the place that I hope will be sustainable in Montreal and will last? And we talked about this center and how it has grown and how it has become sustainable in its own right. I want to leave something like that in 8 years. What do I need to do in order to make One Urban Health tick practically? What do I do? Get more money. I already have a lot of money. So right now, money is not the concern. Partnerships are also not really a concern. There's a lot of local partners in Montreal who have fallen for my rhetoric and performance, and they say, yes, let's do this. Practically, how you know, I will land in Montreal, and then Stefan.
Thanks, Evelyne. My head's spinning, but one thing I found myself thinking about quite a lot around the COVID-19 pandemic was, I guess, the layering up of a behavioural science understanding of habits and how they change, and the importance of moments that matter with organisational routines and their disruption, and then the political science idea of Overton windows and, you know, what's contemplatable as a policy window is expanded by different discourses and events and so on. So yeah. I guess my question / piece of advice would be, how could a One Health perspective be ready to respond to these disruptive moments, given that by every indication we should expect more pandemics to be around the corner, and yeah. You know, how do we respond well while also realizing the opportunity for change?
Yeah, yeah. That's precisely been on my mind. One of the challenges is that if you want to have a sensible discourse, a sensible debate around these things, you're challenged by groups in society that do not want to have a sensible debate. So when you say, look, the evidence is that this and this and this happens, people will, these days, I mean, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, that wouldn't happen. But, you know, they would say, well, science is also an opinion. It's just an opinion. No, but if I would say that, I have sort of aggravated a difference that is there. So how do you bring that in creating windows of opportunity? How do you keep everybody in the tent?
Or do you need to, I guess? And Anita's got a question.
Yeah.
No, I actually don't have a question. I've got a contribution. How do you keep everyone in the tent? If I think of us, if I think of the role that our chair plays, a former politician, you know, who has got a lot of entries, you know, beyond, I think, the partnerships you're talking about, and gives you scope to to go beyond maybe where your circle of influence is. And yeah, I think that played a large role.
Yeah, yeah. I think partnerships is not just a client-oriented frame of mind, and that comes back to indigenous cosmologies. You know, the idea of us academics serving up some evidence, and then other people doing the right thing, is something of the past. You know, we need to see the world very differently, and politicians, leaders, thought leaders in different ways need to be brought in as well. And I absolutely agree with that. Yeah.
Evelyne, can I just say, we've got about slightly less than 20 minutes left. So do you want to keep in the question, or do you want to?
I want to keep in the question because I have a series of slides now on theories of the policy process. So windows of opportunity, yes, that's Kingdon. I actually have a slide about Kingdon, and I'm not going to do that. Okay. So let's keep talking.
All right. Oh, well, so then we open it up for any Q&A or comments that you might have in the room or also online. So there's one. That's good. So why don't we take that one first, Stefan? Which is maybe someone who is online can ask the question, him or herself.
Okay. Mohammed, feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question.
If it's not possible, then feel free to read it out.
Perhaps I'll take on the honor of reading it out on your behalf, if that's all right. So Mohammed asks, what's your opinion on redefining power dynamics between government, people, and non-human entities? And how could this help frame and improve One Health?
Yeah, well, I think that when we talk about conflict and who wins and who loses, I think power dynamics are very, very, very important. And they're often the elephant in the room, where we refuse to acknowledge that there are interests that need to be called out. And recently, over the last year or year and a half, I guess, there's been excellent work happening on the political and the commercial determinants of health, and that health is my space. Looking at power and how commercial interests drive a lot of the power, and to call that out is an important thing. But you need to. Michel Foucault has called it parrhesia, speaking truth to power, which is an ancient Greek concept. So it's important to do that, but you can only do it effectively if you have a good support network. Because if you're just an individual speaking truth to power, the power will kill you, sometimes literally. And look at recently in Ecuador. So that's dangerous, and there's ways of doing it. Also, we need to acknowledge that power isn't an abstract notion. Power is a very real thing. And look, I'm a bit of a political scientist. I'm not into constitutional governance or how you have bills of rights and all that sort of stuff. And that's why I hope to bring legal minds on board in the Canadian thing. But I think it is important to frame power in such a way that we can do something about it, rather than say, oh, it's power, we need to call it out. We need to speak truth to power. How does this happen? And one of my fantasies, and again, I'm not a legal mind myself, but if you look at Parliament, if you look at our democracies, Western democracies, most other ways of organizing countries and responding to people's needs, commercial interests are never directly visible in parliaments, whether it's in the Senate or in Parliament. If you're Shell Oil or Unilever or BHP, you don't have a seat somewhere that is recognized for its influence. they always have to lobby. They have to do it behind the scenes. And now that here in Australia, we have this big discussion about a voice by and for and with Indigenous people. And I think there should be maybe a voice for industry, a visible voice for industry in Parliament, so that they can be identified as the baddies, if they are baddies. And if they're goodies, then that's fantastic. They can show us that they're the goodies. Instead of doing this in backroom banter, let's call them out. Let's do it transparently.
Can I ask maybe a follow-up question on this one quickly? And just often when we think about power in politics, it's a bad thing. It's a problem that needs to be overcome to achieve something that's good. And I think you did a little bit the same in your presentation. But I wonder, I mean, power is, if you have it on your side, if you have power, whether that's relational, institutional, or other forms of power through discourses, etc., you know, it's a means to an end. You can actually achieve outcomes. So just can you reflect on that, sort of how that maybe comes into your perspective?
Yeah, power isn't bad. It's a fact of life. That's how things work. There's one of the classic texts on power is by a man called Dennis Wrong, and he says, "So what creates power?" He was intrigued, and is like 50 years old. What creates power? And it's influence, it's money, it's membership if you are a membership organization. So he talks us through what creates power and what power can do. And power can have different forms. It in its most brutal form is that I can make you do something that you really didn't want to do. But power is also that I can convince you by having clever arguments, not necessarily evidence-based arguments. So it's part of our life. And I honestly believe that by recognizing it and saying, well, here it is, let's deal with it, rather than let's not talk about power because, you know, the poor people will suffer if we start talking about power. No, it's part of what we do.
Recognizing if they are working with it.
Again, so let's move beyond humans. If we really talk about One Health and how we created this pandemic and how there's going to be another one, surely. And by the way, we already are facing another pandemic, and that's a pandemic of chronic disease, which we have created ourselves. And you know, the planetary health people will know everything about that. How do you call that out? Whose powers need to be challenged? Well, let's put it on the table and discuss it.
Other questions? Yep, that's one.
Right, thank you. Very inspiring. I have a question, and it comes from two minds. One is that I've recently joined this place as a PhD student, but I'm also a practitioner. And I'm always curious how these concepts, if you set up an institute like this one, how do you make it real beyond the scientific boundary if you consider that a lot of the problems we have been happening for a long time? Club of Rome was a beautiful example of an enormous amount of study, scientific insight, and then a lot of arguments about details between science people, and it's regularly exploited by politicians. So the connection between politics, creating something that is actually embedded, that's how I see it, what you're trying to create. But being in this environment of evidence-based, and how do you deal with those restrictions and the power that comes?
Yeah. So the secret is really in. I already sort of touched on it, but I will repeat it. The secret of dealing with that is to recognize that it always happens in place. It happens somewhere. It's not abstract. It happens somewhere. And that coalface of where it happens, if you identify that and then think about those ideologies or ontologies or the systems around that have created those places and what happens in those places, are super important.
And make it more, because it sort of got to be from that question, how do you make it practical? And for me, it's like, I work a lot of culture in organizations. And so I'm curious, if you want to make it practical, how you're going to put it into your own team.
Yeah.
In order to not end up where so many other institutes ended up.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. So Stefan could maybe identify whether there's anyone from Montreal online. I mean, it's a very awkward time for them to be online. But in preparing all of this, an amazing opportunity. And in that opportunity, it wasn't just me and the University of Montreal. It was an incredibly wide array of institutions and groups from community. So this in the partnership sphere that I'm dealing with in Montreal is an organization called the Insectarium. So we have botanic gardens and we have zoos, but they are the Insectarium, and they argue for thriving, healthy populations of insects in our societies. And very concretely, what does that mean for a thriving planet and thriving humans? That's one example. Now, that in a way is way beyond my imagination, but they're part of it. So they need, they challenge me. Fantastic. The other thing is there's a movement in Montreal called Les Ruelles Vertes. So they have laneways behind the houses, between blocks of, and people said, these are community spaces. They're communal affairs. Let's turn them into green spaces. And it became such an incredible success that they're now one of Montreal's tourist sites. There's tours along the green laneways, Les Ruelles Vertes. Now that the power of human invention in green space and in dealing with small scale ecology is fantastic, and let's build on that. So that's a very practical way how it will pan out, and how all of that will. The current mayor of Montreal, Valérie Plante, it really is connected to that. She says, well, these initiatives need to be nourished and boosted. Politics are a volatile environment, so maybe next time around she's not re-elected and something else happens. But we now know that we can prepare for that.
We've got a couple of one or two questions online.
Certainly,
Stefan?
Jonathan was ready. Can you try unmuting, Jonathan? Does it work?
I'll give it a go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, very good. Thanks very much, Evelyne. Obviously, a fascinating opportunity for you and for all of us to collaborate with you. I'm the director of the Disaster Resilience Initiative here at Monash, and I had the privilege to work at WHO HQ for about 14, 15 years in the emergencies program. So just reflecting on that, I think there are two concepts around One Health that are in parallel at present. One is where it's really akin to whole of society health in all policies and so forth. And then there is that more One Health concept in epidemics, where it's around ecology, animal health, public health. But what I'm seeing is that they're getting conflated. So in the discussions around epidemic, pandemic preparedness, the reference to One Health is then being used to symbolize multi-sectoral whole of society action where it is clearly not. So this is something that needs to be overcome. That's perhaps not such an interesting thing to talk about, even though it's really very important. What I was interested in hearing from you was about the power and influence of public health in our governance systems. And given that we've been through the pandemic where there's been this elevation of public health in societal consciousness and experience, where has that gone? Where is that going? How does that relate to the values that I assume most of us hold dear, which is around our health and well-being, but that does not seem to play out in terms of the power and influence of public health in our governance system. So how can that be changed?
Yeah. Yeah. So the first part of your question.
3 minutes.
Yes. Trevor Hancock, who I mentioned, who is still very active in Canada, he actually, when I heard of my ideas, he said, "Oh no, when One Health is usually a clinically and epidemiologically framed enterprise, and I don't want you to mingle with it because it will destroy you." So that's wise words from a man who I deeply respect. The other thing is public health. And I think our public health institutions, and I just wrote a chapter with Stephen Duckett, for instance, on the stature of public health in Australia in the context of vaccination politics. And we have wasted the opportunity to really boost our standing and to show that we have been able to make a difference. If you look at the current design parameters for the ACDC, the Australian Centres for Disease Control, they're very traditional. It's like Australia hasn't moved beyond what we believed public health was to be 30 years ago. If we've wasted an opportunity to invest in health promotion, in looking at environments that do create disaster resilience, for instance, it's a very classic reactive micromanaged environment that they're trying to set up. And the Public Health Association, some people there are aware of that. Within the Health Promotion Association, some people are aware of that, and we need to keep fighting. But yeah, I think an opportunity squandered, really.
Was there another question online, Stefan? We are running towards the end of the session.
Looks like that's it.
That's it. Any urgent questions in the room?
Tony, because
thanks very much, Evelyne. That's very thought-provoking presentation. And I wanted to pick up on this question of non-communicable disease and mental health, which really, they are the greatest burdens, of course, now around the world. And as we proceed through the COVID-19 pandemic, it's quite possible that we a reaction from that quite big health constituency, which frankly receives most of the health resourcing in the high-income countries, and rightly so. In the context of your proposal in Montreal, which has similar health context here in Melbourne, how are you thinking about the scope of what you look at? Is it infectious disease pandemics, or is it these broader pandemics?
Yeah, no, it is much more than that, Tony. It's just to give 3 very brief examples. One, we now know that our environment, all of our environment, is just permeated with nanoplastics, and no matter what, we ingest them, and they create dramatic infectious chronic infectious consequences. And that is a One Health challenge, because it has to do with our environment around us, how we have wasted, squandered that environment, and how we've made it toxic. And what's worse there is that, we have not just done that here, we've done it globally. The most challenged, disadvantaged communities in the world will be affected more than this by us white people here in this room right now, and that is definitely part of the proposal that I put. The second example, I briefly mentioned healthy airports. It's a project that I'm doing. Another reason why I love going to Montreal. Montreal is the aviation capital of the world. The UN Agency for Flying, ICAO, is based in Montreal, and because they are there, IATA is there, and the Airports Association of the world is there. And aviation is a phenomenon, a result of how we are destroying our world. The rise of aviation is paralleled with the Anthropocene. And let's fix that. Let's do something right there, and we can, I believe, instead of just saying, "Oh, flying is bad." Yeah, flying is bad, but let's do something about it. The third thing, and that goes even beyond Earth, is interplanetary. So the whole planetary health discourse from the start has amused me, because I thought, by definition, public health for me is planetary. Why do you have to specify planetary health? So jokingly, a few years ago, I started writing about interplanetary health. And looking at that, it's a thing. I have been keynoting on interplanetary health equity, which is a stunning thing. The plastic, the North Pacific plastic gyre, where all the plastic of the world's oceans congregates, there's a parallel of that around Earth. We have the suborbital space debris belt, and we've already polluted our own beyond atmosphere, and that is now brought to the moon. And even further out. This is our chance to actually start thinking about that and do it right, instead of just going, oh yeah, let's Elon Musk and Virgin Galactic, and let's do whatever. In space, no one can hear you scream. Well, eventually it will be a disaster. So yes, it's all part of it.
Well, thanks, Evelyne. We have to stop here for time reasons, but thank you so much for coming down to Melbourne, even in a time where you're actually moving to the other side of the world, more or less. Really deeply appreciate it. There's clearly no limits to your thinking. You're going even beyond the planet. And you got a really exciting agenda ahead of you. 8 years, fully funded. That sounds like a fantastic opportunity.
Yeah.
So good luck. Bon voyage.
I'm not gone. I'll still be here. Virtually or not. Yep.
That's good. Well, join me in thanking Evelyne for this great talk.
Thank you.